The research vessel Stellar Dawn moved through the darkness of space like a silver needle threading through black silk. Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge watching the stars shift past them as they approached their destination. Her hands gripped the rail tighter than usual because today would change everything for humanity. Today they would meet their first alien species. Dr. Elena Vasquez checked her notes for the 100th time as she prepared for the most important meeting in human history. She had spent 3 years studying the Zephyrian language and customs. From intercepted communications, the aliens seemed peaceful enough, but their society was built around strict rules and hierarchy. Elena believed she understood how to approach them without causing offense. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan walked through the corridors of the ship, checking security arrangements one final time. His team of Marines stood ready, but he hoped they would not be needed. Jake had fought in the Martian colonial wars where humans killed humans over resources and territory. He did not want to see that same violence spread to the stars. His job was to protect the diplomats while they tried to make friends with beings from another world. The Stellar Dawn docked at Nexus Prime, a massive space station that served as neutral ground for this historic meeting. The station was built by an ancient race that had vanished millions of years ago, but their technology still worked perfectly. Smooth metal corridors stretched in all directions, and artificial gravity kept everyone comfortable. The humans had arrived first, and now they waited for the Zephyrians to show themselves. Elena smoothed her diplomatic uniform and practiced her opening speech in the Zephyrian language. She had learned that these aliens valued directness and clear communication. She planned to tell them exactly what humanity wanted, a peaceful relationship based on trade and mutual respect. Captain Morgan would support her words with offers of human technology and resources. The airlock hissed open, and the Zephyrians entered the meeting chamber. Elena gasped despite her years of preparation. The aliens were tall and elegant, with skin that looked like living crystal. They moved with fluid grace that reminded her of dancers. Their leader wore robes that shifted color as she walked, and her large eyes seemed to see everything at once. Ambassador Carathis stepped forward to greet the humans. She had studied their species from long-distance observations and intercepted broadcasts. These creatures seemed crude and aggressive compared to her people, but the Zephyrian Empire needed to know if they posed a threat. Her bioneural implant hummed softly in her skull as it analyzed the human life forms around her. Elena began her carefully prepared speech in what she believed was perfect Zephyrian. She spoke clearly and directly about humanity's desire for peace and friendship. She offered to share human knowledge about faster-than-light travel and planetary terraforming. She promised that humans would respect Zephyrian territory and customs, but something went terribly wrong. Carathis stepped backward with her hand moving to her weapon. The other Zephyrians around her began to shift into combat positions. Elena realized with growing horror that her words were being interpreted as threats rather than offers of friendship. In Zephyrian culture, such direct speech was only used when declaring war on an enemy. Jake saw the tension building in the room and moved closer to the diplomatic team. His marine training told him that violence was about to erupt. He could see the alien guards reaching for their weapons while Ambassador Carathis spoke rapidly in her own language. Elena was trying to explain that there had been a misunderstanding, but the damage was already done. The first Zephyrian guard attacked without warning. His energy blade cut through the air where Elena had been standing a moment before. Jake tackled the scientist to the ground and rolled behind a conference table as more weapons fired. The meeting room filled with the sound of energy weapons and shouting voices in 2 different languages. Captain Morgan's voice crackled through Jake's communication device, ordering him to protect the diplomats and get them to the ship. Jake drew his sidearm and began returning fire at the Zephyrian guards. Their weapons were more advanced than human technology, but they seemed surprised by his quick reactions and tactical thinking. 6 Zephyrian warriors moved to surround the humans. Jake positioned himself between them and the diplomats while calculating his next move. These aliens were faster and stronger than humans, but they fought with formal techniques that followed predictable patterns. Jake used his knowledge of asymmetric warfare to turn their advantages against them. He rolled under their energy blasts and came up firing at their weapon hands. When one warrior charged him with a blade, Jake grabbed a chair and used it as a shield while landing a devastating punch to the alien's solar plexus. The warrior doubled over, gasping for air that burned his lungs. Carithus watched the human fighter with growing amazement. He moved like liquid death, always where his enemies did not expect him to be. His tactical mind seemed to predict their moves before they made them. More importantly, he was protecting the weaker humans behind him, even though it put him at greater risk. Her bioneural implant began to pulse with increasing intensity. The device was designed to detect genetic compatibility for mating purposes, but it had never reacted to an alien life form before. As she watched Jake fight, something deep in her biology responded to his warrior spirit and protective instincts. Jake disabled the last guard with a combat move. He had learned fighting pirates in the asteroid belt. The alien warrior went down hard and did not get up again. Jake kept his weapon trained on the remaining Zephyrians while backing toward the exit. Elena and the other diplomats were already moving toward the airlock dot. In the sudden silence that followed the fighting, Jake and Carithus locked eyes across the room. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, they studied each other like two predators meeting in the wild. Jake saw intelligence and pain in her alien features. Carithus saw strength and honor in his human eyes. The spell broke when more Zephyrian guards poured into the room. Jake grabbed Elena's arm and ran for the airlock. Behind them, Carithus shouted orders in her own language but did not pursue them. Her implant was still pulsing with signals she did not understand. The Stellar Dawn undocked from Nexus Prime and jumped to hyperspace just as Zephyrian warships arrived. In the medical bay, Elena treated minor injuries while Jake filed his report. The first contact mission had been a complete disaster. Instead of making friends, they had made enemies of an entire alien empire. But something had happened in that meeting room that none of them understood. As the ship raced back toward human space, Carithus stood alone in the damaged chamber, touching her implant and thinking about the human warrior who had fought 6 of her people and won. The device in her head whispered that this Jake Sullivan was more than just an enemy. He was something her people had never encountered before, a genetically compatible mate from another species entirely. 3 months had passed since the disaster at Nexus Prime and the galaxy burned with war. The Zephyrian Empire had declared humanity a hostile species and their fleets attacked human colonies across 12 star systems. Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the battleship Freedom's Edge, watching enemy ships approach through the viewscreen. His promotion to colonel had come with the bloody price of countless battles. Captain Ryan Torres commanded the Freedom's Edge with steady hands. Despite the overwhelming odds they faced, the Zephyrian ships were faster and carried more powerful weapons than anything humanity could build. But the aliens had made one mistake in their calculations. They had underestimated the human refusal to surrender even when facing certain death. Jake led the 7th Tactical Response Unit, a group of soldiers who specialized in impossible missions. They had learned to use human unpredictability as a weapon against the formal fighting styles of their enemies. Where the Zephyrians expected order and structure, the humans brought chaos and adaptation. The battle for the Kepler system had been raging for 6 days. Human forces were badly outnumbered, but they fought with desperate creativity that confused their enemies. Jake's unit had developed new tactics that turned civilian ships into weapons and asteroid fields into ambush points. The Zephyrians won most engagements, but at costs they had never expected to pay on the enemy flagship. Carithus served as military liaison between the war fleet and the Empire's high command. Her official role was to study human psychology and predict their battle strategies. But she found herself obsessed with combat recordings of one particular human warrior. Every night she watched footage of Jake Sullivan leading his soldiers. In desperate battles across the frontier, her bioneural implant continued to pulse whenever she saw his image. The device had been designed by her people's greatest scientists to identify genetic compatibility for mating purposes. It should never have reacted to an alien life form, yet something about this human-triggered responses she did not understand. She had submitted the malfunction for analysis but received no useful answers. The Zephyrian fleet had captured the mining colony on Kepler 442b after a brief siege. 3,000 human civilians were being held in detention camps while the Empire decided their fate. Jake's unit received orders to mount a rescue mission despite the obvious risks. The planet was defended by an entire battle group and the chances of success were minimal. Jake studied the tactical situation with his usual methodical approach. The colony sat in a valley surrounded by mountain ranges that would provide cover for his approach. The Zephyrians had established their command center in the main administration building where they could monitor the prisoner camps. A small force could infiltrate the compound and create enough chaos to evacuate the civilians. Captain Ryan Torres approved the mission with obvious reluctance. He had seen too many good soldiers die in hopeless battles, but he could not abandon innocent people to alien captivity. Jake's unit prepared for what they all knew might be their final mission. They loaded their transport with enough supplies for a week-long operation behind enemy lines. The dropship Valiant carried Jake's team through the planet's atmosphere under cover of darkness. They landed in the mountains 50 kilometers from the colony and began their approach on foot. The Zephyrians had orbital sensors, but human technology had developed new stealth systems that made small groups nearly invisible. Kirithus was reviewing prisoner reports when the attack began. Explosions rocked the command center as human soldiers appeared from nowhere and began systematic destruction of communication equipment. She watched through security cameras as Jake Sullivan led his team with precision that bordered on artistry. Every move seemed planned, yet adapted to changing circumstances. The humans fought their way through the compound toward the detention camps. Jake's tactical brilliance was evident in how he used the terrain and enemy positions to his advantage. When blocked by heavy weapons, he found alternate routes. When outnumbered, he used explosives to even the odds. His soldiers followed him with absolute trust in his leadership. Kirithus found herself moving toward the battle zone despite orders to remain in the secure command bunker. Her implant was pulsing so intensely that she could barely think straight. Something about watching Jake fight triggered responses in her biology that she had never experienced before. She needed to see him in person to understand what was happening to her. The rescue mission succeeded in evacuating most of the civilian prisoners, but Jake's team was cut off during the withdrawal. Zephyrian reinforcements surrounded the administration building and began closing the trap. Jake ordered his soldiers to fall back while he provided covering fire from an exposed position. His selfless courage allowed the others to escape but left him trapped, and outnumbered. Jake fought until his ammunition ran out, then continued with hand-to-hand combat techniques learned in the Martian colonial wars. The Zephyrian warriors were stronger and faster, but he used their formal fighting styles against them. When the battle ended, he was unconscious but alive. The aliens had orders to capture human leaders for interrogation. Kirithus volunteered to conduct Jake's interrogation, despite having no experience with prisoner questioning. She claimed that her studies of human psychology made her the logical choice for the assignment. Her superiors agreed, hoping she could extract useful intelligence about human military capabilities and future plans. The detention facility was a sterile complex of metal corridors and holding cells. Jake was placed in a secure room with minimal furnishings and constant surveillance. When he regained consciousness, he found himself facing the same alien diplomat who had been present at the disastrous first contact meeting. Recognition passed between them like an electric current. Kirithus entered the cell with careful steps, her implant humming so loudly she was certain Jake could hear it. She had prepared questions about human military organization and tactical doctrine, but when she looked into his eyes, all her planned interrogation techniques seemed suddenly unimportant. There was something about this human that called to her on a level deeper than conscious thought. Jake studied his captor with the same intensity he brought to analyzing enemy battle plans. She was beautiful in an alien way that he had not expected. Her crystalline skin caught the light and her large eyes seemed to look directly into his soul. More importantly, he sensed intelligence and conflict behind her formal demeanor. This was not a simple enemy, but a complex being with her own struggles. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours and covered everything except military intelligence. They discussed philosophy, morality, and the nature of courage. Jake spoke about his duty to protect innocent people while Carithus explained her people's need for order and security. Neither revealed classified information, but both learned more about their enemy species than any formal briefing could have provided. When the session ended, Carithus was more confused than ever. Her implant insisted that this human was genetically compatible with her despite the obvious impossibility. More disturbing was her growing attraction to his unwavering moral code and protective instincts. Everything she had been taught about aliens and enemies was being challenged by one conversation with Jake Sullivan. Jake had been imprisoned for 2 weeks when the alarms began screaming through the detention facility. The lights flickered and the walls shook as something powerful struck the outer defenses. Through his cell window, he could see strange black shapes moving across the sky like living shadows. Zephyrian guards were running through the corridors, shouting in their own language with voices full of terror. Carithus burst into Jake's cell without her usual formal composure. Her crystalline skin had turned pale and her large eyes were wide with fear. She spoke rapidly in broken human language about something called the Void Swarm, an enemy that devoured entire civilizations. The detention facility was under attack and the Zephyrian defenses were failing. Jake listened to the sounds of battle growing closer and made a decision that surprised them both. Instead of trying to escape, he offered to help defend the facility. Carithus stared at him in disbelief as he explained his reasoning. The civilians being held here would die if the Void Swarm broke through, and Jake could not abandon innocent people regardless of their species. The Void Swarm creatures were unlike anything Jake had ever encountered. They moved like liquid darkness and seemed to absorb energy weapons without taking damage. The Zephyrian soldiers fought bravely, but their formal tactics were useless against an enemy that had no structure or predictable behavior. Jake watched them fall back in confusion as their weapons proved ineffective. Carithus unlocked Jake's restraints and led him to the command center where the battle was being coordinated. The facility commander was dead and his subordinates were paralyzed by fear. Jake studied the tactical displays and began issuing orders in a mixture of human and Zephyrian languages. His years of combat experience told him how to fight an unconventional enemy. The key was to stop thinking like a soldier and start thinking like a survivor. Jake directed the defenders to use the facility's own systems against the invaders. Maintenance robots became mobile weapons platforms. Environmental controls created choke points and barriers. Every piece of technology was turned into a tool for resistance. Carithus found herself translating Jake's orders and coordinating the defense alongside him. Her analytical mind complemented his tactical intuition perfectly. Where he saw opportunities for ambush, she calculated resource allocation and supply lines. Together, they turned a panicked retreat into an organized resistance. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with the Void Swarm creatures retreating into space. Jake and Carithus stood in the damaged command center surrounded by exhausted defenders from both species. The humans and Zephyrians had fought side by side against a common enemy and discovered that cooperation was more effective than either could achieve alone. In the aftermath of the battle, Carithus faced a terrible choice. Her superiors expected her to execute Jake for his escape attempt despite his role in saving the facility. But her bioneural implant was now pulsing constantly whenever he was nearby, and she had begun to understand what it meant. This human was not just genetically compatible with her. He was her destined mate according to Zephyrian biology. Jake sensed her internal struggle and offered to return to his cell if it would protect her from punishment. His willingness to sacrifice himself for her safety triggered something deep in Carithus' nature. In her species, such selfless behavior was the highest sign of worthiness in a potential mate. The biological imperative was becoming impossible to ignore. Instead of following orders, Carithus used her family's political connections to arrange a secret meeting with human leadership. She claimed to have critical intelligence about the void swarm that could save both species. Her message was transmitted through neutral channels to Colonel Amy Harrison, the human fleet's strategic commander. The meeting took place on an abandoned space station in neutral territory. Colonel Harrison arrived with a small escort including Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had been promoted to xenobiological consultant after the first contact disaster. They were suspicious of Zephyrian motives but desperate for any advantage against their alien enemies. Kirithis presented her intelligence about the void swarm with clinical precision. The parasitic creatures had destroyed dozens of civilizations across the galaxy and were now approaching both human and Zephyrian space. Her people were not conquerors but refugees fleeing from an enemy they could not defeat alone. The war between humans and Zephyrians had weakened both species at the worst possible time. Dr. Elena Vasquez was fascinated by Kirithis' bioneural implant and its reaction to Jake Sullivan. She had never seen anything like it in her studies of alien biology. The device was responding to Jake as if he were a member of Kirithis' own species, suggesting evolutionary connections that seemed impossible. The implications were staggering. If humans and Zephyrians were genetically compatible, they might be distant cousins separated by millions of years of evolution. Elena's research into the ancient ruins found throughout the galaxy had hinted at a lost civilization that had seeded life on many worlds. Perhaps both species descended from the same source. Jake struggled with the reality of his situation. He was attracted to Kirithis on levels he did not fully understand, but accepting their biological bond felt like betraying his duty to humanity. She represented everything he had been fighting against, yet her courage and intelligence during the Void Swarm attack had shown him her true character. Kirithis faced even greater challenges. Her people viewed cross-species relationships as an abomination that violated their most sacred laws. But her implant insisted that Jake was her perfect genetic match, a pairing that occurred perhaps once in a million individuals. To ignore such a bond would be to reject the wisdom of her ancestors. Colonel Harrison made a difficult decision. The human fleet was losing the war against the Zephyrians, and the Void Swarm represented a threat that could destroy both species. If Jake and Kirithis could work together as effectively as they had during the facility attack, their cooperation might be the key to survival. Jake was given a choice between court-martial for unauthorized cooperation with the enemy or acceptance of a classified mission. He would work with Kirithis to develop combined tactics against the Void Swarm while their respective governments negotiated a possible alliance. The mission would require him to trust an alien with his life while she risked everything to trust him with hers. As they prepared to leave the neutral station, Jake and Kirithis stood together looking out at the stars. Both knew that their personal relationship was becoming something more than military cooperation. The biological bond between them was growing stronger with each passing day, and neither could deny the emotional connection that had developed. Through shared danger, their first mission together would test whether two species could overcome centuries of evolutionary separation to face a common threat. Jake's tactical brilliance and Kirithis' analytical mind had proven effective against the Void Swarm, but larger challenges lay ahead. The galaxy's fate might depend on whether a human warrior and an alien diplomat could learn to truly trust each other with their hearts as well as their lives. The massive Void Swarm fleet appeared at the edge of human space like a plague of mechanical locusts. Admiral Patricia Wells watched the sensor readings from her command ship with growing horror as thousands of enemy vessels moved toward Earth. The parasitic creatures had consumed 3 entire star systems in their approach and showed no signs of slowing down. On the other side of the galaxy, War Prime Zarian faced the same nightmare as swarm ships surrounded the Zephyrian homeworld. His people's most advanced weapons barely scratched the alien hulls while entire colonies fell silent under the endless assault. Both species stood on the brink of extinction with nowhere left to run. Jake Sullivan and Kirithis had spent weeks developing their joint tactical plan aboard the experimental vessel Harmony. The ship was a hybrid design that combined human adaptability with Zephyrian technology, crewed by volunteers from both species who were willing to risk everything for A chance at survival. Jake commanded the vessel while members were used to informal communication and creative problem-solving, while the Zephyrians followed strict protocols and hierarchical command structures. When the two groups tried to work together, the results were chaos and confusion. Jake watched his mixed crew struggle with basic operations and realized that military cooperation alone would not be enough. The humans and Zephyrians needed to understand each other on a deeper level before they could function as a unified force. He made a decision that shocked both species by publicly acknowledging his biological bond with Kira. The SS. The announcement sent ripples of controversy through both fleets. Human officers questioned Jake's loyalty, while Zephyrian commanders accused Kirithis of betraying her species for alien contamination. But Jake's demonstration of trust gave the mixed crew permission to form their own bonds of cooperation, and FRINDSHIP Dr. Marcus Chun, the ship's medical officer, discovered something remarkable during his examination of Jake and Kirithis' neural patterns. Their biological connection created a unique resistance to void swarm mental influence. The parasitic creatures used psychic attacks to convert their victims into mindless drones, but the bond between Jake and Kirithis seemed to provide natural immunity. This discovery changed everything about the war effort. If their neural link could protect them from swarm mind control, it might be the key to defeating an enemy that had conquered dozens of civilizations. Jake and Kirithis would need to get close enough to the swarm's central hive mind to deliver a killing blow that would free all the converted beings across the galaxy. The combined human and Zephyrian fleets gathered at the Meridian Nebula for the final battle. Admiral Wells and Warprime Zarian had put aside their differences to face the common threat, but tensions still ran high between the two species. Jake and Kirithis found themselves serving as living symbols of cooperation in a galaxy that had forgotten how to trust. The Harmony led the attack against the swarm's central hive ship, a massive structure that dwarfed even the largest human battleships. Jake's tactical brilliance guided the fleet through the enemy formation, while Kirithis coordinated defensive systems and damage control. Their mental link allowed them to anticipate each other's moves and react faster than any normal crew. The battle was unlike anything either species had experienced before. The Void Swarm creatures fought with perfect coordination but no creativity, while the allied forces combined human unpredictability with Zephyrian precision. Jake used asteroid fields as cover while Kirithis calculated optimal firing solutions. Together they carved a path through the enemy fleet toward their ultimate target. The swarm's hive mind sensed the threat and began focusing all its attention on the Harmony. Waves of converted beings from a dozen different species attacked the ship with suicidal determination. Jake's crew fought desperately to protect their vessel, while Kirithis managed power distribution and emergency repairs. As they approached the hive ship, Jake and Kirithis felt the swarm's mental pressure trying to break their neural link. The parasitic intelligence was ancient and powerful, capable of dominating entire planets with its psychic influence. But their bond had grown stronger through shared danger and mutual trust, creating a connection that the swarm could not break. The final assault required Jake and Kirithis to link their consciousness directly to penetrate the hive ship's defenses. They would need to merge their minds completely while maintaining their individual identities, a process that had never been attempted between different species. The risk was enormous because failure would mean not just death, but the loss of their souls to the swarm's collective. Jake took Kirithis' hand as they initiated the neural link in the ship's command center. Their thoughts flowed together like two rivers joining into one mighty stream. He felt her analytical mind merging with his tactical intuition while she experienced his emotional depth and protective instincts. For a moment that lasted forever, they became a single being with the combined strength of both species. The merged consciousness penetrated the hive ship's core and found the central intelligence that controlled billions of converted beings. The swarm's mind was vast and alien, filled with the consumed memories of countless civilizations. But Jake and Kirithis brought something it had never encountered before: The power of willing cooperation between free minds, their combined assault, shattered the hive mind's control over its converted servants. Across the galaxy, beings that had been enslaved for centuries suddenly remembered who they were and turned against their former masters. The swarm's perfect coordination collapsed into chaos as its own converted forces began attacking each other. The explosion of the hive ship sent shockwaves through space that could be felt on planets light years away. Jake and Kirithus found themselves changed by the experience, their minds permanently linked in ways that neither fully understood. They had saved the galaxy, but at the cost of their individual identities. As the surviving swarm ships fled into deep space, the combined fleets celebrated their victory. But Jake and Kirithus stood apart from the celebration, still connected by the neural link that had made victory possible. They could feel each other's thoughts and emotions as if they were their own, creating an intimacy that transcended physical attraction. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Two species that had been enemies would need to learn how to live together in peace. Jake and Kirithus had shown that cooperation was possible, but they had also paid a price that few others would be willing to accept. Their love had saved the galaxy but transformed them into something new. Neither fully human nor fully Zephyrian, but something greater than either could be alone. 6 months after the destruction of the Void Swarm, Jake Sullivan stood on the observation deck of New Harmony watching the first sunrise over their shared world. The planet had been chosen as a symbol of cooperation between humans and Zephyrians, a place where both species could build something beautiful together. His reflection in the window showed the same face, but his eyes held depths that had not been there before the neural linking. Kirithus joined him at the window, her crystalline skin catching the golden light of the alien sun. Their mental connection hummed quietly between them, a constant awareness of each other's thoughts and feelings that had become as natural as breathing. She could sense his contentment mixed with lingering concern about their transformed relationship. He felt her analytical mind, calculating the day's administrative duties while appreciating the planet's natural beauty. Admiral Lisa Morgan had been promoted to oversee the establishment of the joint colony after her exemplary service during the war. She watched Jake and Kirithus from across the command center and marveled at how naturally they worked together. Their partnership had evolved beyond simple cooperation into something that represented the best qualities of both species working in perfect harmony. The colony of New Harmony grew rapidly as volunteers from both civilizations arrived to build the future together. Human engineers worked alongside Zephyrian architects to design cities that blended technological efficiency with natural beauty. Former enemies discovered that their different approaches to problems created solutions neither could have achieved alone. Dr. Elena Vasquez had established the Institute for Interspecies Studies in the colony's research district. Her work on the biological compatibility between humans and Zephyrians had revealed fascinating possibilities for the future. The neural linking that Jake and Kirithus had undergone was not unique to them but represented a potential that existed in many individuals from both species. Jake's role as planetary governor challenged him in ways that military command never had. Instead of fighting enemies, he was building bridges between cultures that had centuries of mistrust to overcome. His tactical mind proved surprisingly effective at solving civilian problems, while Kirithus' diplomatic skills helped smooth conflicts before they could escalate into violence. Their daily routine involved meetings with construction teams, trade negotiations, and endless decisions about how to blend two very different ways of life. Jake's direct human approach balanced Kirithus' careful Zephyrian analysis, creating policies that satisfied both species' needs. Their neural link allowed them to communicate complex ideas instantly and react to problems with unified purpose. The personal cost of their transformation had been significant. Jake could no longer experience purely human emotions because Kirithus' Zephyrian logic influenced his every thought. She found her analytical nature softened by his emotional responses to situations that logic alone could not address. They had become something new, Neither fully human nor fully Zephyrian, but a unique fusion of both. Dr. Marcus Chun continued monitoring their neural patterns and reported remarkable stability in their merged consciousness. The linking that had saved the galaxy showed no signs of deteriorating or causing harmful side effects. If anything, Jake and Karithus seemed to be growing stronger and more capable as their partnership deepened. The announcement of their formal bonding ceremony created excitement throughout both civilizations. The event would be broadcast across human and Zephyrian space as a symbol of the new alliance between their species. Traditional elements from both cultures would be combined into a celebration that honored their different heritages while looking toward a shared future. Preparations for the ceremony required weeks of planning as diplomats from both governments worked to create protocols that would satisfy everyone involved. Jake found the formal requirements exhausting but understood the symbolic importance of their union. Karithus approached the planning with her usual thoroughness, ensuring that every detail would honor both species' traditions. The ceremony took place in New Harmony's Central Plaza with representatives from dozens of worlds in attendance. Jake wore a modified human dress uniform, while Karithus was adorned in traditional Zephyrian robes that shifted color with her emotions. Admiral Wells and War Prime Zarian stood together as witnesses to the union that had saved both their civilizations. Jake's vows spoke of his commitment to protecting not just Karithus but all the innocent beings they would serve together. His words were simple and direct, promising to use his strength in service of peace rather than war. Karithus responded with elegant phrases that wove together human concepts of love with Zephyrian ideals of perfect partnership. When they joined hands for the final ritual, their neural link flared with shared joy that could be felt by sensitive individuals throughout the crowd. The bonding was complete in ways that transcended physical ceremony, creating a union that would last as long as either of them lived. They were no longer two separate beings, but a single entity with two bodies and one purpose. The celebration continued for 3 days as humans and Zephyrians worked together to honor their new alliance. Former enemies shared food, music, and stories, while their children played games that blended elements from both cultures. Jake and Karithus moved through the festivities as living proof that cooperation was not just possible but joyful. As the ceremony ended, Jake and Karithus stood once again at their favorite observation point, watching the sunset over New Harmony. The mixed crews of their old ship had gathered to wish them well before departing for new assignments throughout the galaxy. These brave individuals would carry the message of cooperation to other worlds where humans and Zephyrians were learning to work together. Their neural link carried shared memories of the long journey from that first disastrous meeting to this moment of perfect understanding. Jake remembered his initial suspicion and fear of aliens, while Karithus recalled her people's rigid prejudices against other species. Both had been transformed by love and necessity into something greater than either could have imagined. The galaxy spread out before them, filled with possibilities for exploration and discovery. Dozens of hybrid ships were already under construction, crewed by volunteers from both species who wanted to carry their message of cooperation to distant stars. Jake's tactical brilliance and Karithus' analytical mind would guide these expeditions, as they sought out new civilizations and offered friendship instead of conquest. In the quiet moments between their official duties, Jake and Karithus found simple happiness in each other's company. Their love had grown from biological compatibility into something deeper and more meaningful. They had discovered that true partnership required not just attraction but shared purpose, mutual respect, and the willingness to sacrifice individual desires for common goals. As the stars emerged in New Harmony's darkening sky, Jake and Karithus knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead. They had saved the galaxy from the Void Swarm, but the real work of building lasting peace would take generations to complete. Their bonding was just the beginning of a story that would inspire countless others to reach across the void between species and discover the strength that comes from unity.